Welcome to Midnight Pasta, Creepypasta stories, dark nights, no escape. Subscribe if you're not afraid of what follows. I remember the exact moment it happened. It was a Wednesday evening, around 7 p.m. I had just finished dinner and was sitting on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. The blue light from the screen cast a dull glow in the room, the only light breaking through the shadows of the evening. My mind wasn't on anything in particular. Just some mind-numbing scroll through social media, thoughts floating like smoke. Then, without warning, the screen went dark. It wasn't just the phone, it was everything. For a second, I thought it was the battery. I tried restarting the phone, but nothing. I tried to connect to Wi-Fi, but there was no connection. I checked the TV, black screen. I stood up, confused, and glanced out the window. The streetlights, usually so bright, were gone. It was as if the entire world had hit a switch and plunged into complete silence. A strange sense of unease settled in my stomach, heavy and cold. I picked up the landline phone, just a reflex, even though I hadn't used it in years, but it was dead too. "Dad?" I called out. No response. I walked into the kitchen, but it was empty. The house was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of what I thought was the refrigerator, though even that faded quickly. I stepped outside into the cool evening air. It was darker than it should have been. I could barely see the outlines of houses down the block. The usual buzz of life, cars passing, lights from living rooms flickering on and off, was gone. In its place was an unnerving stillness. I wasn't the only one outside. I saw neighbors slowly emerging from their homes, standing in the street, eyes wide, faces tense, as if they all realized the same thing at once. There was no power. But it was more than just the power. It was as if every piece of technology, everywhere, had ceased to exist. It took about half an hour before a single car drove down the street, its headlights cutting through the blackness. We all stared, as if waiting for someone to speak, but no one did. "What the hell's going on?" someone finally said. It was my neighbor, Carol. She was always the first to speak up. I liked her for that. "I don't know," I said, rubbing my arms, the cold creeping in. "Maybe it's some kind of glitch. Maybe the grid, maybe a satellite?" The words felt empty as they left my mouth. It didn't feel like a glitch. It felt like something much bigger. I looked up at the sky, trying to find some explanation in the stars, but there was nothing. The stars were muted. The moon was absent, obscured by the thick clouds that had started rolling in. It wasn't just the blackout anymore. There was something about the air, something strange, a weight that wasn't there before. A few minutes passed. We all exchanged uneasy glances. Some of us walked toward the end of the street to check on the power station. Maybe someone had seen something. Maybe they had more information. But there was nothing. Not a single sign of life anywhere. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The world, in its strange silence, felt different. As if we were disconnected from the flow of time. As if we were standing on the precipice of something much darker than just a power outage. I tried my phone again. Nothing. I turned it off and back on, hoping for a miracle, but I was only met with the same empty black screen. Then, almost as if to punctuate it, the ground trembled lightly beneath my feet. A subtle vibration, like a deep hum rising from the earth itself. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but when I looked around, I saw others shift uncomfortably, glancing down at the pavement. "It's happening," Carol whispered, but she didn't elaborate. The words hung in the air, hanging with more meaning than anyone could explain. Something was happening, something bigger than we realized. I stayed outside for a while longer, the unsettling quiet stretching on as the minutes turned into hours. Neighbors were starting to go back inside, each of us retreating into the strange new reality of this blackout. But the odd thing was, it wasn't just that we had no power. There was no sound. No hum of appliances or the faint rumble of distant traffic, just the faint buzz of the wind in the trees. The darkness felt wrong. Not in a way I could fully explain, but in a way that scraped against my nerves like the sound of nails on a chalkboard. I decided to go back inside. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. My thoughts bounced from one theory to another. Some kind of cyber attack, a mass EMP, some sort of coordinated global event. But nothing felt right. Even those possibilities seemed too small for what we were experiencing. I fumbled through the dark to my kitchen, hands outstretched, searching for the comforting warmth of a light switch. But I kept my fingers away from the stove. I didn't want to risk something sparking up, even in the absence of the usual power surge. When I sat down in front of the cold, blank TV, the stillness pressed harder against my chest, a heavy weight that seemed to be pulling everything deeper into some unseen void. That's when I heard it. The first whisper of noise in the air, a soft tapping, almost imperceptible. It was coming from the window. I stood up and approached, my heartbeat quickening, breath shallow. I looked out into the blackened street. Nothing. Just the silhouettes of houses, some with dark windows, others with the flickering remnants of candles inside. The tapping continued, faster now, a rhythmic thrum like someone was knocking on the glass. But I saw no one. I opened the window, trying to pinpoint the source. A gust of wind blew in, cold against my face. The tapping stopped. I shut the window and backed away, my skin crawling. Was it the wind? Had I imagined it? That's when I heard it again. This time, it wasn't just tapping. It was something else. It was a voice, faint, distant, like a child calling for help. It sounded far away, but the pitch was sharp, unnaturally so. "Hello?" I called into the void, but the voice stopped. I waited. Nothing. The silence returned. I should have gone to bed. I should have tried to sleep, to ignore it all, but I couldn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I grabbed my coat and left the house again, heading toward the center of the block. I couldn't explain why, but I felt drawn to the same place where the tapping had come from. There, in the middle of the street, I met Carol again. She had a flashlight in her hand, the beam flickering like it was struggling against something unseen. "I keep hearing things," she whispered. Her voice was tight, nervous. "It's like people are talking in the wind." I nodded. "I heard a voice. A child, maybe? It didn't sound right." She swallowed hard. "It's not just the voices, though. There's something else. Have you seen how the animals are acting?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "There's no birds, no cars, no nothing. It's like the whole world just shut down, all at once. It wasn't just the lights. It wasn't just the electricity. The entire fabric of life seemed to have unraveled. And whatever was happening was only deepening." Just then, a loud crash broke through the quiet. We both jumped, spinning around to find the source. One of the street lamps, still dark of course, had fallen to the ground. The hollow thud echoed out across the street, and we both flinched at the sound. Carol grabbed my arm. "We need to get inside. We need to stay inside." I nodded, too rattled to argue, but something kept me from heading straight home. Something tugged at the back of my mind, making me want to keep walking, to follow the unexplainable. I turned to Carol. "You're right, but I think we should check the power station. See if anyone knows what's going on." The words felt hollow as they left my mouth. What were we going to find? A team of technicians huddling around broken equipment? It didn't feel like that. It felt more like we were wandering into a void, a space where the normal rules of life had ceased to exist. We made our way toward the power station, but the closer we got, the stranger the world seemed. The wind had picked up, carrying with it a faint smell, like wet earth and something metallic, like blood. I looked up at the sky. The clouds had grown heavier, swirling above us in thick, oppressive masses. A storm was coming. But this wasn't just any storm. There was something different about the way the air felt, thick with anticipation. We reached the power station and stood outside the gates. There was no one there. No cars, no workers. The building sat in complete silence, as though it had been abandoned long before the blackout. I peered through the chain-link fence, trying to make sense of what was inside. Nothing. The air felt colder now, biting into my skin. I pulled my coat tighter around me, but it didn't help. I had the strangest sense that we were being watched. "I don't think anyone's here," Carol said, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded, turning to look down the road. The town, the whole world, felt like it was holding its breath. And then, for just a brief moment, I thought I heard it again. The voice, a whisper, carried on the wind, and this time it sounded closer. "Help me?" But who was it? And why was it calling? The voice lingered in my head as we stood there, staring at the darkened power station. The wind had started to pick up, swirling around us, pushing against our backs as though urging us to leave. But something was keeping me rooted to the spot. That voice. The sense that something big was just beyond the edge of our perception. Waiting. Carol pulled at my sleeve. "We shouldn't be here," she said, her voice shaking. This doesn't feel right." I wanted to agree with her. I wanted to turn and go back to the safety of our homes, but every instinct in me screamed to stay. There was something we needed to understand, something that was slowly unraveling in front of our eyes. "We can't leave yet," I said, my voice low and uncertain. "We need to know what happened, why the lights went out, why everything is so wrong." She didn't argue, though I could see the fear in her eyes. I could feel it too, the sensation of something ancient stirring just beneath the surface of the world. I turned away from her and started walking toward the front of the building. There were no lights, no sounds of machinery running, just the wind and the strange scent of iron that hung in the air, as though something unseen was bleeding into the atmosphere. My footsteps echoed too loudly in the silence. It was almost as though the ground itself was watching us. I reached the front door of the station and tried the handle. Locked. Of course. I turned back to Carol, frustration creeping up on me. "There's got to be another way in." She hesitated for a moment before nodding, and we circled around the side of the building, hoping to find an unlocked window or a door that had been left ajar. But everything was locked tight. That's when I saw it. A small maintenance hatch, barely visible in the dim moonlight near the back of the station. It was a small opening, just big enough for us to crawl through. I looked at Carol. "Can you fit through there?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She followed my gaze and hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I can." I stepped forward, my hands trembling as I tried to lift the hatch. It creaked loudly, the sound of metal against metal sending a chill down my spine. I paused, listening. But the world remained eerily still. With a final grunt, I managed to pull the hatch open, revealing a narrow, darkened tunnel beneath the building. A wave of stale, damp air rushed out, and I had to fight the urge to step back. There was something about that air that didn't feel right. It felt heavy, almost suffocating. Carol glanced at me, her face pale. "Are you sure about this?" I nodded, though my mind was racing. What was down there? What had happened to the town, to the world? "We have to know," I said, more to myself than to her. "We have to find out what's going on." I crawled into the tunnel first, the damp earth beneath me cold and unsettling. The further I went, the more the air seemed to press in, thick with something unnatural. I could hear Carol behind me, her breath quick and shallow. She was scared. I was too, but there was no turning back now. The tunnel twisted and turned, winding down deeper into the earth. The deeper we went, the more I felt as if the world above us was slipping away. The wind, the voices, the feeling of being watched. Everything seemed to fade, replaced by an almost suffocating stillness. Finally, the tunnel opened up into a small room, dimly lit by a single flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The walls were made of rough stone, covered in damp moss and strange markings. The air in here was thicker, almost too thick to breathe, and I had to force myself to exhale. Carol looked around, her face pale. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't have an answer. I was too busy scanning the room, trying to make sense of what was in front of me. There were strange symbols carved into the walls, symbols I didn't recognize. They twisted and coiled around each other in an almost hypnotic pattern, and as I stared at them, my head started to spin. I turned to Cal, about to speak, when I saw something in the corner of the room. Something moving. I froze. A figure. A person. Or something that looked like a person. It was hunched over in the corner, its face obscured by shadow, but I could feel its presence. It was watching us. I could hear its breath, slow and labored, like something trying to stay hidden. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. For a moment, there was no response, just the soft sound of breathing. Then, slowly, the figure moved. It stood up, the shadows shifting with it, revealing a twisted face. Half of it was covered in some kind of dark, jagged material, as though the flesh had been burned away. The other half was smiling. It wasn't human. Before I could react, the figure took a step toward us, its movements jerky and unnatural, like it was being controlled by some force outside of itself. The ground beneath us seemed to tremble, and the lights flickered once more. Then, everything went dark. I could hear nothing but the rapid pounding of my heart in my ears as the darkness swallowed us whole. The flickering light above had died completely, leaving us in a suffocating, impenetrable blackness. For a moment, I thought I might be dreaming. This could all be some terrible nightmare. But the cold, the smell of damp stone, the presence of something, someone, moving in the dark told me otherwise. Carol's breathing was shallow, panicked, and it only made my fear grow. "We need to move," she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, though I wasn't sure where to go. The tunnel, the room, it was all a blur now. All I knew was that something wasn't right, and the longer we stayed, the more I could feel the presence of that thing in the corner of the room pressing in on us. It was waiting. I reached out, feeling the stone walls with trembling hands, trying to get some sense of direction. But there was nothing to hold on to, nothing to guide us. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever, swallowing any attempt to orient ourselves. And then, a voice. Soft. Faint. Almost as if it was coming from the walls themselves. "You're not supposed to be here," it whispered. I froze. Carol did too. We both turned our heads in the direction of the voice, but it was impossible to see anything. There was no movement, no form to the voice that had spoken. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "What do you want?" I called out into the void. My voice sounded alien, as though even I didn't recognize it. The voice responded, not with words, but with a deep, rattling sound. It was a noise that seemed to come from far beneath the earth, from a place no living being should venture. Carol grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "We need to go now," she hissed, panic rising in her voice. "Now!" I didn't need any more convincing. We had to leave. Whatever this was, whatever was down here, it wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could comprehend. I turned, trying to find the tunnel, but there was nothing but blackness. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick with something else, something wrong, and it felt like it was getting tighter, suffocating us, as though the earth itself was closing in. I felt a hand, cold, clammy, grip my shoulder. "Get out," the voice rasped. I screamed, spinning around, but there was nothing. No one there, just the heavy darkness pressing in on me, suffocating me, the ground shifting beneath my feet. And then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps. The sound of something, or someone, moving through the darkness toward us. "Carol!" I yelled, but my voice was drowned out by the sound of those footsteps coming closer, closer. She was still holding on to me, but I could feel her shaking, feel her fear pulsing through her hand, steady and relentless. "Run," she whispered. Arlo thought I didn't need to be told twice. We stumbled forward, tripping over rocks, trying to push through the blackness, but it felt like the world was fighting us. The walls seemed to close in tighter with each step. The air grew thicker, colder, and I could feel the weight of something ancient pressing down on me. A pressure that clawed at my skin, at my mind, at my very soul. I don't know how long we ran, minutes, hours. Time lost its meaning down here. I only knew that the footsteps were always behind us, always following, drawing closer. Every time I dared to look over my shoulder, there was nothing but darkness. But the footsteps, those footsteps, kept getting louder. And then I saw it. Faint light in the distance. It was a small glow, barely perceptible at first, but it was enough. It was the way out. The tunnel. "Carol, there!" I shouted, pointing ahead. Without hesitation, we both surged toward the light. The footsteps grew louder, faster, echoing in the narrow tunnel like the sound of something in pursuit. I didn't dare to look back again. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I kept running. We were so close. Oh, close. Finally, we reached the tunnel. I could see the hatch. We just had to get to it. I reached for it, my fingers scrabbling at the stone, but the light was dimming, fading. The ground beneath my feet began to rumble. The air grew colder, and I could feel it. Something behind me. Something so close now that I could feel its breath on my neck. "Carol," I screamed, "hurry!" She was right behind me, but I could hear her breath rasping, her footsteps slowing. No, we couldn't stop. Not now. Not when we were so close. But the ground shifted beneath us. The rumbling grew louder, and then the floor gave way. We both fell. I didn't have time to scream. I don't remember how long we were falling. The darkness was so complete that it felt like time itself had ceased to exist, like we were suspended in a void, tumbling through nothingness. My stomach lurched, and I instinctively reached out for something to grab, but there was nothing, just air and weightlessness. Then, with a violent crash, I hit the ground. Pain erupted through my body, and I couldn't catch my breath for a moment, struggling to adjust to the sudden stop. I lay there, dazed, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of earth and something metallic, almost like rust. "Carol?" I called out, my voice hoarse. My hand scraped against the ground as I tried to push myself upright. There was no answer, only the sound of my own labored breathing. I couldn't see anything. The darkness here was worse than before, thicker, more oppressive. It felt like something was alive in the shadows, something watching. "Carol!" I shouted again, panic rising in my chest. Nothing. I forced myself to stand, my legs unsteady beneath me. I felt around, my fingers brushing against jagged rocks and soft, damp earth. My breath came faster as I tried to gather my bearings. This place. It was unlike anything I had ever encountered. It felt as though the earth itself had swallowed us whole, a cavernous void with no end. I stumbled forward, one hand extended before me to guide me through the dark. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breaths and the distant drip of water. But then, I heard it, a low guttural sound coming from deep within the earth. It wasn't a human voice. It was something older, something wrong. My heart thudded in my chest. I froze, listening. The sound grew louder, a rhythmic thudding, like the pulse of the earth itself. It seemed to be coming from everywhere, beneath my feet, above, all around me. The ground trembled beneath me, and the walls of this underground chamber seemed to shift, almost as if the cave itself was alive. And then I heard something else. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper coming from the darkness ahead. "Help me." I froze again. My breath caught in my throat. The voice, it was familiar. So familiar. It sounded like Carol, but her voice was twisted, distorted, as though it wasn't truly hers. "Carol?" I asked, my voice trembling. The whisper came again, louder this time, more desperate. "Help me." My pulse quickened. I had to find her. I stumbled forward, my hands trembling as I reached out into the darkness, desperate to find any sign of her. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and I could feel my sanity slipping away as I moved further into the void. And then, light. A flicker, distant but undeniable. It was the softest glow, as though some distant flame was struggling to stay alive in the deep recesses of this underground world. "Carol," I shouted, relief flooding my chest. I pushed forward, the light growing brighter, but the closer I got, the more distorted the whispers became. They echoed in my ears, drowning out all other sound. They were no longer just Carol's voice. There were others now, too. "Help me. Don't go. Leave." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog in my mind. But the voices, there were too many of them. The cave seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing in tighter with every step. I reached the source of the light. What I found made my blood run cold. It wasn't Carol. It was a figure, a silhouette. Standing in the middle of the cavern, their form was shrouded in the same dim glow, a soft, pale light that flickered like a dying flame. I could barely make out any features, only the outline of a person, but something was wrong. The figure was standing perfectly still, but its head was tilted at an unnatural angle. The shadows around it seemed to distort and writhe, as though they were alive, moving with a mind of their own. And then, I saw it. The figure's eyes, if you could even call them that, were hollow, empty sockets. And from them, thick black tendrils of darkness were spilling out, writhing like worms, twisting in the air around it. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its presence, pressing in on me like a vice. I couldn't breathe. "Help me," the figure whispered, and the voice, it was the same as before, but it was wrong, twisted. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the ground, and my chest felt as though it was being crushed under some unseen weight. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The light flickered and died, leaving me in the oppressive, suffocating darkness once more. I stumbled back, gasping for air. I turned, looking for any sign of Carol, but there was nothing. Only the same black void that had consumed us. I wasn't alone. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The voices, the whispers, they weren't from Carol. They were from something else, something ancient, something trapped beneath the surface. And it was angry. I couldn't move, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. The darkness was suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides, but it wasn't just the absence of light that held me here. It was the weight of something more ancient, more powerful, something that had been waiting, lying dormant beneath the earth's crust for centuries. The air felt thick, almost viscous, as if the atmosphere itself was alive and aware. The voices continued their chorus around me, growing louder, closer, until it felt as though they were coming from inside my own mind. "Believe," one voice hissed, cold and guttural. "Help me," another begged, familiar but not. "Don't let it take you too," a third whispered, barely audible but unmistakably clear. I couldn't tell where they were coming from, but I could feel their eyes on me, those black, hollow eyes, the ones that burned with an insatiable hunger. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached out, trying to steady myself against the jagged walls of the cavern. My fingers brushed against something slick and cold, like the surface of a stone that had been in the dark for far too long. I could feel a subtle pulse in the rock beneath my touch, like the faint beat of a heart. The ground trembled again, this time more violently. The air grew colder, the very earth beneath me vibrating with a low hum that seemed to come from the deepest depths. It was as though something beneath us was stirring, awakening from a long slumber. And then, the whisper returned. "Help me." It was Carol, but it wasn't her. I felt it in the pit of my stomach. The same primal dread I'd experienced when I first heard that voice, the voice that wasn't quite human. I turned. There was a flicker of movement, just a shadow at first, but then it became clearer, sharper. A figure. The same outline I had seen before, standing tall in the midst of the darkness, its features still hidden by the flickering light. The thing. It moved, gliding silently toward me. But as it approached, I could make out the details. The figure's skin was pale, almost translucent, and its limbs were unnaturally elongated like a marionette. The mouth, when it opened, was wide and jagged, full of sharp teeth that gleamed even in the faint light. But its eyes, those hollow, empty sockets, were the worst part. They seemed to pull at my very soul, as if they were searching for something deep within me. "Carol?" I whispered, my voice trembling, though I already knew it wasn't her. Wasn't. It never had been. The thing stopped before me, its form radiating an eerie energy that sent chills running up my spine. The silence that followed was deafening. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body betrayed me. I was frozen in place. The thing leaned in closer, and its cold breath washed over me, carrying with it a rancid, decayed scent that made my stomach churn. It reached out, and I could feel its presence, its coldness wrapping around me like a vice, choking the life out of me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was trapped, surrounded by shadows, by whispers, by something that wasn't human. And then, in a voice that scraped across my mind like nails on glass, it spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. It was as though the air had been sucked from my lungs, leaving me gasping for breath. I closed my eyes, hoping to wake up from this nightmare, but there was no escape. The thing's mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, its teeth gleaming in the darkness. "This place," it crooned, its voice low and soothing, like a lullaby that promised only pain. "It's been waiting for so long, and now you've awakened it." I shook my head, desperately trying to break free from the suffocating grip of fear. But it wasn't just fear anymore. It was something worse, something far more primal. The earth around me trembled again, but this time, it was more than just a shake. The ground cracked open, splitting wide as a massive rumble echoed through the cavern. Something large, something ancient, was emerging from the depths. I could feel the pull of it, an undeniable force that seemed to call to me, drawing me toward it. The whispers intensified, now an overwhelming cacophony, all urging me to move closer. But I didn't want to. I couldn't. "Don't," I gasped, trying to pull away, but the thing's cold fingers wrapped around my wrist, its grip like iron. "Don't fight it," the thing whispered, its voice like silk. "You're already part of it. You always have been." The words hit me like a slap, reverberating in my mind. What did it mean? What was it saying? Before I could process the thought, the ground beneath me gave way. I fell. This time, I couldn't brace myself. The fall was longer, deeper, the very air becoming heavier as I plummeted into a void that felt endless. My body twisted and turned in free fall, the darkness consuming me entirely. Then, with a brutal jolt, I landed. I lay there, stunned, my body aching, every breath feeling like it was being pulled from my lungs by some invisible force. The whispers stopped. The silence was deafening, but it was no longer just the absence of sound. It was the kind of silence that felt wrong, the kind that crawled under your skin and pressed against your ears. I sat up, disoriented, and when I looked around, I saw nothing. No cave, no shadows, just a barren, empty expanse. And in the distance, a shape, a figure. It stood alone, watching me. And then, just as the realization hit me, just as I understood where I was, everything went dark. Thanks for listening. If you're still here, maybe made it through the night, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Midnight never ends. It just waits. Until next time, stay in the dark.